Ha! You didn't know who I was, did you? So here today we've got a reading where the people just spent this time walking with Jesus and did not recognise him. The thing that stood out for me when I read this reading is that I reckon I would have been really annoyed because those people, they'd walked with Jesus, it turned out to be him, they were so excited, they ran all the way back to Jerusalem. That'd be like running all the way from Warrnambool back out here to Allensford, and they got there to tell this story, this great story. And what did the other disciples say? Yeah, we know, he's appeared to Peter. Oh, I hate that when you get your bubble popped like that. But I suppose one thing that it shows is that there's been irritation in the church right from the very beginning. Or maybe it just says more about me. There's a few things I think we can learn from this reading. And one of them, I reckon, is that it shows us that there weren't just the 12 disciples and Jesus at that Last Supper. There was these other people there as well. Now, I think could possibly or likely be that those two people on that journey were women. So we're only given the name of one of them, Cleopas, and I reckon that's probably very connected to the name like Cleopatra. And another reason is that they spoke about some women from our group. So that suggests to me that they might have been women too. And then when they did get to Emmaus, they cooked the dinner and had it ready for Jesus. So another suggestion that they might have been women. But it's interesting that in this story we're told that Jesus had appeared to Peter. And similarly, we're told in 1 Corinthians 15 that Jesus had first appeared to Peter. But that story about Jesus appearing to Peter is not told. We're just told that he did. Whereas this story is told to us in great detail. And I reckon there's two reasons. First reason is that it's about the explanation of Scripture. So on that journey, Jesus was talking to them about how the Hebrew Scriptures or our Old Testament had explained or referred to him and led to the story of him. Now, there's two ways you can look at that. One is you can look for verses that say something about Jesus, but they're a bit hard to find, really. There might be odd verses, but they seem to be out of context to me, like Psalm 30, verse 3. You kept me from the grave. I was on my way to the depths below, but you restored my life. So Luke hasn't given us the explanation that Jesus gave. I think what it was more about was like the general thrust of Scripture. That thrust of Scripture of God's journey with the people for liberation, and liberation from the real slavery of selfishness. And I think what Jesus has done is then picked the gems of God's grace and God's inclusivity and the important bits of love that is more important than ritual. There's a great quote that I really like from Richard Rohr, that Jesus finds out where the text is truly heading, beyond the particular moment, fear or circumstance. He knows there is a bigger arc to the story, one that always reveals a God who is compassionate, non-violent and inclusive of outsiders. Jesus knows how to thin slice the text to find the golden thread which is moving towards inclusivity, mercy and justice. So I think that's what Jesus did when he was walking with those disciples, not picking out individual verses, but giving us the whole sweep of where God is revealed through those scriptures. And I think the second important reason why this story is told in detail is because Jesus is found when those women offered hospitality and honour to the stranger. And that's where we can discover Jesus too now, though it's quite restricted in these circumstances. You probably remember in Matthew chapter 25, in the last bit of Jesus' teaching, he is saying, if you did this to the least of my brothers and sisters, you've done it to me. If you've fed the hungry, visited the sick, visited those in prison, given shelter to the homeless, you've done it to me. And then in Luke's Gospel, if we look for what's the very last bit of Jesus' teaching before the Last Supper and his arrest and all, it's about, I am among you as one who serves. So at the moment in this time, our government has been really responding to the coronavirus and giving support to the unemployed. But I did notice they said that they were giving support to those who've become unemployed through no fault of their own. So great that they're doing that, but they've made a judgment that casual workers, overseas workers, the long-term unemployed are not deserving, and they are ones who are missing out in this. And these are the people who serve, the people that do the most service sort of jobs, and yet they're thought of as not deserving. So I think we can meet Christ in them. So I think the invitation from this story is to look on those people as Christ, to honour and advocate and thank all those who do the serving jobs in our community that are still working in health, in supermarkets, and those who've been excluded because we can't receive their service now. This weekend also, we're reflecting on those who have given service to their country during war. And not to judge why they are involved, or not to judge the rightness or wrongness of participation in the war, but again to thank them and to commit ourselves to work for peace. Many of our church activities of service are closed at the moment, but we see there are other people doing it in different ways. I think it's a challenge to us to be able to celebrate that it's not just us, that there is good things happening in the wider community. But we are also invited, I think, to give, and to give outstandingly, to be more generous than the rest of the world. And one last thing too, is to recognise that people will be meeting Christ in us as well. So may we all be surprised to find this blessing.